Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Mike Mearls Happy Fun Hour. I'm your host, not surprisingly, Mike Mearls. This week, we're going to be talking about monster design. So, I've got a couple windows open. I'll move this one on the side of my head, and you get to see something here on the left side of the screen, what we call, on the D&D team, our monster. It's either called a one sheet or a white sheet. Both terms have kind of taken off. So what we're going to do is start by showing you the end result of some monster design, and then we're going to start designing some monsters. I've got a few undead critters from 4th edition that I basically just really want to use in my Interior Veil campaign. So, hey, this is as good an excuse as any to knock out some creatures. But I wanted to show you the full process from beginning to end, rather than just focusing on the mechanics. To me, what makes monster design a lot of fun is the story element of it. So hello chat, thanks for everyone. France beat Belgium. Wow, I heard there's some people watching here in the office, so I heard a cheer go up. So I knew someone had scored. This would feel like maybe 20 minutes ago, but I wasn't sure who. Sorry, spoiler alert. Any World Cup fans planning on watching the game later? Sorry. But so what I thought we would do is start by embiggening the file to our left. Now I realize some of this might get a little cut off with my head, but I'm hoping if I take a look over the other monitor, we're not losing too much. Chat, let me know if you can't see this at all, if this is like coming in just really blurry, or if you have any issues reading this. I'm going to go walk you through it, but I know some people like to just read ahead or get a sense of what's going on. So just throw that in there. Let me know. All right, your work art looks like we're fine. Okay, cool. And I'll keep an eye. A little bit larger? Okay, sure. Now, keep in mind, I think we found out... Here, maybe if I just do this. Yeah, there we go. So then my big head will be over here. How's that working? A little blurry? Okay. Maybe I don't want it here. Why does it insist? Okay, it's really insistent that I don't want to... Here we go. Okay, cool. All right. A little larger. We're going to end up with like one... Oh, there we go. I can actually do that and that. All right, cool. I think that's about... Oh, no, I still have a little more room to play with. So now Happy Fun Hour will consist of us just... Whoa, that's too much. See, I don't know if you can see this. For some reason, the little scaling thing is off the edge of my screen, because that's just how this works sometimes. Let's do that. As usual, the Happy Fun Hour consists of me using MS Word poorly. Okay, you can read the top paragraph. So you won't be able to read ahead, but at least you can read this. All right, so what we have here, what we do with this kind of... the one sheet or the white sheet, depending on what we want to call it, is just lay out the basic identity of a monster. And this is the first thing that we do. For something like the Skulk that's existed in D&D before, part of our homework for this will consist of looking at the prior monster entries and putting them all in one place. And then we'll have a writer's room will convene, and someone will have been nominated to be the person in charge of this monster, and they'll basically present, here's what we know of this monster so far. Then in the room, we'll bounce around ideas of what direction we want to take. What you might notice here is this format is actually pretty important. We've got our intro line here. Empty-souled, invisible creatures of the Shadowfell, skulks enter the material plane and do their master's bidding in return for a slice of a creature's identity. So this is just our quick, we want to interest a dungeon master in using this monster. We want to have a single punchy sentence makes you go, oh, that sounds interesting. So that's like our intro. That's our thesis statement. This is why this monster is interesting and why it exists in the game. And then these bullet points... Here, and I'll take a... Okay, it looks like you can see the top two, and my head's in the way of the third one, but... So I'll scroll up in a second. Well, we'll walk through these. So these bullet points are also meant to be fairly concise. And they're meant to give a little more depth to that opening sentence. We know that in a typical Dungeons & Dragons campaign, if you have a monster, it could be something that ends up being part of a role-playing encounter. Depending on the nature of the monster, it might drive the story of an adventure, so you want to know a little bit more about its identity. And a lot of the times we try to think of, why do these things do what they do? And then we think of, what they do. Thinking that the what is a pretty simple hook to add to your campaign. This creature likes to steal gems. Okay, that can give me away, it's looted the royal treasury, and the players need to do something about that. And then the why being more the strategic big picture. Well, for this creature, and let's say our theoretical gem-stealing creature, well, these are creatures that are torn from the elemental plane of Earth and compelled to serve others and steal for them. So we may have a creature that's something you might more likely to talk to. When you finally track it down, you realize that this warlock is the one really responsible for it. This creature really couldn't be held accountable. A lawful good character might say, well, the creature, it's as much of a victim as whoever was the target of the robbery. So to give things a little bit more structure here. So what we've got here is this idea of lost souls. So we wanted to come up with this idea of where do these creatures come from? This is important for humanoid creatures especially, because we don't necessarily want there to be an assumption that there are, for instance, for skulks, there are skulk cities, and there's a skulk civilization, and they have a pantheon of deities they worship. We saw the skulk here, if you can read the bullet point. Skulks are travelers who become lost in the Shadowfell and lose all sense of their self. So this tells us that skulks don't occur naturally without there has to be a magical effect, in this case, a planar effect. And so creatures that become lost in the Shadowfell, they become skulks. So this concept of a skulk kingdom doesn't really make sense, but we'll get to the little bit of a twist we put on it when we get to the bottom. So we know where they come from. We also know that maybe a DM might use this as something that kind of points to a tragic backstory for one of these creatures. And then what we'll do is, after I walk through this, I'm going to show you the entry on D&D Beyond, so we can see how much of the stuff actually shows up in a product. We have this idea that they're summoned. So we didn't necessarily want skulks to have a strong motive element themselves. We saw them as being tools of other NPCs or creatures. Again, this calls into this idea that DMs sometimes want creatures that are very much, they have a plan, they have something they want to do, they're very active and independent. And other times you want creatures that kind of shelve beneath those real active agents in your world. You just need minions, or you need a nice, flavorful, distinct creature that could be a side quest or the sort of monster of the week, but it's not necessarily something that's going to define the big elements of your campaign. So for skulks, we have this idea that you could sacrifice some of your own charisma to give these creatures an identity, at least a shadow of an identity. That's what could lure them back to the material plane and would compel them to serve you. And we also like this idea, this kind of creepy thing that they might look a little bit like people that you know. And then we're building this idea with hollow lives, this idea that, they can't speak, but they can understand. If you speak to them, they could understand you. And this idea that they seek identities, they have the hollow lives. They don't become things. They sort of steal other people's identity. And this idea, again, they've lost their identity. They don't really have their own independent thing. So they want to take it from others, whether it's given to them to summon them, or once they're in the material world and they run rampant, they are trying to displace other creatures. We also like this fallible invisibility. Invisibility had always been a really signature ability for skulks. We wanted to tap into this folkloric element that their invisibility could be foiled in a few ways. That ties in this idea of identity. That a mirror, right? Like you can see the skulk in a mirror because the skulk has no identity of its own. It can't see itself in the mirror, but you can see it there. Certain candles, right? Fat rendered from a corpse with an unknown identity. So again, that mythic link. Or by small children. This idea that children are still forming their own identity so they can see skulks. Because they have a little bit of a weird sympathetic link to them. And this idea that, now I don't remember if this carried through, but we have this idea that a see invisibility spell would not see them. So yeah, this is what's kind of fun about Ultra Dicky. So are skulks like YouTube stars? Burned out YouTube stars, maybe. So then when you get to the bottom here, we have this table. And this is something that is really aimed more at the game design end of things. And Sage Hallmar, I'm assuming that would not apply to True Sight or True Seeing. That's a great example of thinking about how the invisibility thing works. And you'll see when we look at the final stat block. In this phase, we're not worried about game mechanics. We just want to say, okay, here's some things we want to throw out there that are story elements. When we get to the game design side, then we have to then have a clear definition of these things. And I can't remember off the top of my head if this is something that was carried through. I'd be curious to see. What we have here in this little table is the idea. It's a quick summary. We just, name and alignment for the creature, its target alignment. And then what we want to do is every creature should be good at something. So what we're saying is the skulk's signature abilities are invisibility, and they're very good at sneaking around. But we also then want to balance that by giving creatures something they're bad at. And often that weakness is something that can make a creature more flavorful than you'd expect. So this idea that they're poor tactics, they don't work together well. They aren't, because they're chaotic, but also because they have this weird thing of they want an identity. They don't have one. So they don't, that extends this idea of not having an identity with a group. They don't think of themselves as part of something. They're empty. And this idea, they're not physically powerful. Getting at this idea that since they're invisible, they have trouble imposing their will on the world around them. And again, that's kind of that idea here. And then we have a quick summary of the stats. And this just, the plus sign here shows us they should have a good dexterity. And the minus signs on all four. These other four stats say they should have weak or basically no bonus here at most, if not a penalty. And then we specify we think their charisma should be 1 or even 0. And this is another example where, like, when we were writing these notes up, like, I don't think you can actually have a 0 in a stat in D&D. But again, this is just pure storytelling. And then this is a note, and these are the kind of things where we expect, especially the game design side. So here's our note: invisibility can only be counted by specific in-world elements mentioned above. So that's this from the story side, for telling the mechanical side. Here's our target. This is what we'd like to hit. But obviously, if it's not going to work mechanics-wise, then we'll get as close as we can. So BNAA UK asks, why would they be chaotic evil, not chaotic neutral? That ties back to this bullet point here of Hollow Lives, that if they were more content with their identity, or if they were content with copying others as a general rule, then they would probably trend more toward chaotic neutral. But the Skulks specifically want to take over other people's identity. That makes them more predatory, and that's what pushes them more toward evil. And that's generally how we handle alignment when we design. The alignment is a starting point. Rather than it saying, okay, we're going to dictate now specifically how you act, we use it to flavor and sort of diagnose, like, here's how this creature, when it's idling, when it doesn't really have, the characters aren't on the screen or on scene, whatever, is this creature malevolent? Is it benevolent? Or does it want to just be left alone? That's kind of a handy way to think of good, neutral, and evil. Chaotic being, does this creature think of itself first? Lawful being, does this creature think of the group first? Does it look for an outside source? Or is it somewhere in the middle where it'll listen to a rule if it's a rule that it helped make, or that it's in its close circle, but otherwise is really reliant on its own judgment. And so that kind of gives us some of that flavor there. And then chaotic fitting this creature, because of its lack of identity, seeing that it's extending to this lack of group identity. So that's what pushed us to the sort of chaotic evil corner. The MD Siraji asks, what makes some monsters uncommon or rare? Great question. Actually, I just skipped right over that. This entry here, this works with when we're talking about what we think of as tribal creatures. So imagine if this was the goblin sheet, which we actually did for the monster manual at the launch of the game. We would have, this description would apply to the typical goblin, so like that goblin warrior type. Then the uncommons and rares would point to us to exceptional individuals that we also want to stat out. So, for instance, actually, I'll open D&D Beyond. We can take a look at one of the entries. Here, I've got the Skulk here, but I'll keep my place there rather than. If I go to D&D Beyond and actually show you an example here. Oops, what just happened? Oh, that's fun. Uh-oh. I think this is the first time we've had like an actual semi-traumatic software failure. Okay, luckily it is just Microsoft Edge that's having an issue. Wow, it's like a miniature blue screen here. You guys seeing that? Okay, let's do this. Let's close our window. Is that gonna work? Nope. Wow, apparently like moving the window to the side is just what killed this. So you know what? We're gonna do this. Always playing with fire here. You never know what's going to happen, but let's just end that task. Thank you. It's a little faint echoes of my days running. It was a Kill 9 on Unix systems way back in the day. Okay. Yeah, let's just do that. Let's play it safe. So I tried to save our place and ended up nuking our browser. There's a lesson in there, but I refuse to learn it. All right, so let's go back to the goblins. And then we'll go to the goblin monster entry. So this would be our common goblin here. The stat block you're seeing up here. I won't zoom in because if you're watching this, you probably know what a goblin is. And then the uncommons and rares would be if we go to let's go to our official list of monsters and just search for all our goblins. So the goblin boss would be a great example of a rare. This would be a creature we'd say, hey, a goblin who takes over and becomes a leader. They have some specific abilities we want to capture that makes them distinct. Again, that gets that tribal thing, that it's a group that works together. Let's see, what other goblins do we have here? Oops, did not mean to do that. Meant to break that down. Hobgoblin's a good example. Since they're now, this is actually another interesting thing. Goblins being neutral evil don't necessarily have as much regimentation. Hobgoblins, though, being lawful evil, are really big on like hierarchies and jobs. So the Devastator being a Hobgoblin spellcaster, the Iron Shadow being a Hobgoblin monk and kind of secret police, and then the Captain, the Warlord being low-level commander, high-level commander. So these guys here, probably Devastator and Iron Shadow and Captain would be our uncommons, and our Warlord would be a rare. Often they also scale up in complexity. So, and essentially what we're going to do today is I want to design some skeletons and zombies, and I'm basically going to be dropping in some new uncommon and rare creatures of that type. So, one last thing I want to do quickly before, because I don't want to spend too much time just talking at you, I actually want to do some design here. X Thunderhorn. The problem is he's using Microsoft Edge. Internet Exploder and all those jokes from back in the day. So when we look here at the Skulk, and let me, let's see. So I'm hoping this comes through, but if you're online, just take a peek at the stat block. I forget off the top of my head how to make this bigger, and I don't want to anger Microsoft Edge any more than I already have. But if you can see here, if you can read it, the strength on this guy is 6. So we delivered on our, hey, not a high strength. Con and Int both came in at 10, and I think that was primarily, we had them flagged as lower ability scores. Con coming in at 10 is often where you'll find a low ability score for a monster, just so we don't really hurt its hit points too much, and having to just like throw on a bunch of extra hit dice just to make the hit points work. Intelligence 10, this is probably one where, as we thought about it, for these creatures to be, they'd have to be somewhat clever to make the most of their invisibility. If they were too low intelligence, it might just sort of beggar, like, well, okay, these guys aren't that clever. How can they actually set up ambushes or trick you and things like that? It was kind of running counter to the rest of the monster's story. We asked for high dex. We got 119, almost the sort of player character maximum. Our wisdom at 7 is really to counterbalance this intelligence thing. Sure, they can come up with smart plans, but they don't necessarily execute them well. They may get rash. They may underestimate creatures. And the charisma 1, as we specified, these guys should have the lowest charisma we can give them. And their stealth skill coming in at 8. So with their challenge rating of 1/2, they'd have 4 + 2 for proficiency, and it looks like we gave them an additional +2 essentially bonus for being a skulk. If you see skills that don't look like they're adding up correctly, that could either represent we are invisibly giving the creature expertise, we're doubling its bonus, or we're just giving it a flat bonus to capture what we're aiming for a bonus. I kind of think it is just, it's a bonus to expertise for that specific skill, or doubling. With our invisibility here, we do give them that it can be circumvented by 3 things, but notice it does not appear that we are saying that invalidates other methods. So I wouldn't be surprised if this is something to do with this idea that it's just there's so many effects that could potentially detect invisibility that we didn't want to say no way can do it, because that might cut off some ones which would make sense, like a very high level spell like True Seeing. So we did back it up with trackless. So this may have been saying, okay, if we are allowing magic, we're not trying to limit that so much. This is an extra ability that makes them more invisible, like into more of a strategic sense. If you walk into the town that skulks have kind of taken over, this helps preserve the mystery. The ranger does a search. So are there any tracks coming through here? You don't see any. So yeah, and then you can even see here some of these bullet points, like Hollow Lives was a bullet point in the write-up. It just was transferred over and kept. So yeah. There we go. Oh, well, look, 9 minutes ago. Hey, Gaia Sock TV and Alert. Thank you for coming in and asking a question. That is right. Correct. Nice. All right, so that's kind of gives you a sense of a big picture, a quick walkthrough in 20 minutes of how we design creatures. So any questions? I'm going to take a quick look at chat, see if we Captain Killsteel. I see dead people. Is that every DM's opening? When you're about to have a big fight with the boss battle, let the players know. I see dead people. Let's see. Fooster asks, do monsters have roles? If you played 4th edition, and actually, you know what? That's a great segue. I will just crack open. You know, let's do skeletons. I'll do skeletons. So, oh no. Let's try this. Oh no. No, this is not. You know, this is funny because this just updated to. Aha, there we go. Oh, Edge. Okay, Edge, you angered me, but now you've come to our rescue by opening a PDF. You know, Adobe the PDF reader updated to my machine today, and it's like, it's time to restart. And I was like, yeah, no, I don't. I restart for no one, except for when Microsoft makes me restart. So the monster rolls came in on 4th edition, and they were designed to give monsters clearer roles in terms of encounter building. Because in 4th edition, there was this idea that you would have one monster per player character. That was kind of the ideal. And then the monsters would work together like a party of player characters. Role was a sort of shorthand for class. That it told you, here's generally what this creature should do, and a good monster grouping will include multiple roles, and will generally always include at least one soldier and one brute. And the minion role being a little more descriptive of these guys, basically I think it was 4 or 5 minions equaled one creature of that same level. So there was the idea you could throw in lots of hordes against the party. 5th edition just tried to, by having monsters always remain a threat, but their hit points essentially scaling down as you gain more power, tried to just kind of pick that up in passing, rather than how it would have to make an exception to the rule for how these creatures worked. We kind of designed with roles in mind. With 5th edition, there's a little bit more of a flexibility. What would often happen is, if you look at this blazing skeleton here, which is actually a creature... Oh no, can I zoom? Oh no. Okay, I don't know how to zoom using this browser. It's my favorites. This is sharing. I'm sharing with you right now. Here we go. All right, make that nice and embiggen that. And hopefully my head's not getting in the way. Okay, that's great. Oh, wait. So if you take a look here, our blazing skeleton is artillery. Now, artillery would sometimes have this fire R abilities. Any creature that starts its turn in the R takes 5 fire damage. That was actually a bit of a common thing you'd see some designers throw in artillery, this idea that if you get up close to them, they have a way to push you away. Artillery, as they would say, they're basically our long-range creatures. Not so good in close combat, but good at hitting you from far away. And if we go across the page break here, we can see they have a close combat attack, this Blazing Claw, which doesn't do very good damage, 1d4 plus 1 and ongoing 5. Ongoing 5 fire damage basically said the start of each of your turn, you took this damage. I think it was the start, maybe in the end. It's been a while. If you compare that, the ranged attack is essentially doing 1d4 plus 3 more damage. So you're, and duplicating the ongoing 5 fire. This guy actually has a little bit beefier attacks for close combat than you might expect on an artillery. Plus, the one thing now this is something which in 4th edition did this a lot, and I think it was actually a challenge, because I think information overflow is something that 4th edition had as a challenge for DMs. This is an attack against armor class. This flame orb range attack is an attack against reflex defense. So rather than roll your saving throws, you had static defenses. An idea that sounds good in theory, but in practice what would happen is, and we observe this when we watch people play, DMs would just think this was an attack against armor class. They would often forget to target the defense. So what it meant was this, essentially if you're attacking a defense, that's the equivalent of a +2 bonus. This is essentially +8 for this damage versus +10 for about 5.5 more points of damage. But often DMs would forget to roll against reflex. And so this sort of very subtle benefit would be lost on a lot of players. And that's one of the big reasons why we shifted back to saving throws being rolled rather than having static defenses, was the defenses were this is just such a subtle difference in realizing +8 versus reflex versus +8 versus AC for many DMs. There are DMs who got that and were good at managing all that information, but especially beginning DMs, they would just end up frustrated because this attack maybe wasn't quite pulling its weight in the way it should. So anyways, that's how the rolls work. And so and actually I think so it'll be a good way I'll show you, I'm going to design the Blazing Skeleton. Let's pick that one up, because I think the Blazing Skeleton's kind of cool. And I'll show you kind of how that might translate over to 5th. Let's take maybe a couple more, see if there's any more questions that look like pressing. Yeah, this is like, I forget who the artist is here, but I love, part of the reasons why I want to bring these guys in is I just like this art. And I love like this flourish here on the Bone Shard skeleton of that like weird purple flame, and we designed this guy, we're going to do something with him. So yeah. So let's see what else we got here. Yeah, daedalus wing, rolling equals drama. That's definitely something which we have found, is that people like rolling, especially I think saving throws on the player side. I think it's one of those things where you could make a case, I think very easily, that having defenses makes more sense in terms of its consistency. But I think players liked the idea that, hey, the dragon breathes, now everyone gets to roll. It's also one of those things where I think just in terms of the at the table experience of the players, that felt a little more empowering. They felt more like, oh, I'm going to dodge out of the way of this thing, rather than I'm just going to take it because the DM tells me, hey, I got a 19, and that hits your reflex defense. It's one of those things where the practicality of the practicality of game design, in the sense of like, let's make methods that move very quickly and are easy to understand, can come into conflict with the emotional resonance of the play at the table. Sometimes things are emotionally resonant because they aren't necessarily streamlined. That you actually want to pause and have a little handling time on something because that actually marks it as being different and important. It's kind of like in a text document. If you watch me type and I'm going to open the template, we bold things, we have underline under things. This is how we show you this is different and that's important because what's following now is important. So Anyway, so let's design this creature. Now, I like the Blazing Skeleton. It's one of my favorite creatures. I love the skeletons and zombies from 4th edition. I always thought they were so much fun because I love undead, because I love zombie movies. Growing up, my mom, huge horror movie fan. My uncle, huge horror movie fan. Basically, almost everyone in my mom's side of the family loved horror movies. Every Friday night, or it was either Friday or Saturday, my grandmother had access to cable. This was back in the 70s and early 80s when cable TV, if you're old, back in the day, you used to have a wire that would run from the company to your TV, and you'd plug it in, and that's how you got TV. If you're even older, it used to just come, it was wireless. We went from wireless TV to wired TV. It's actually kind of a step back, I guess. But she had HBO and Cinemax, and I think it was every Friday or Saturday night, one of those two would have a horror movie on, like at 8 or 10 o'clock at night. And so maybe once a month we'd go over and we'd all, as a family, make pizza, make popcorn, and watch a horror movie. Even as I saw horror movies as a very young child, I was exposed to like Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It might explain how I got this job. I was trained for it. My mom's feeling was rated R, which was supposed to be this guideline that said, hey, this movie's not appropriate for kids under 17. But it said not appropriate for children under 17 who are not accompanied by an adult. So my mom, I think, interpreted it as, well, I'm with him, so it's okay. We can go see Jaws 3 when he's 7. No sweat. So, but in any case, enough about that. Let's talk monsters. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do to take the lazy way out and just go save as. You get to see here, you got to see the stat block template. I want to lay down some story elements here. These skeletons are essentially the uncommon and rare versions of our existing skeletons, so I am not looking to write like the next great gaming story with these guys, because I really just want burning skeletons that try to burn you to death. That's enough for me. Call me simple. Call me a humble man with simple tastes. But I just want my blazing skeleton to burn things. But I do want to come up with a sense of a myth behind it. So these guys, skeletons right now in... Oh, you know what? Let's do this. Let's go to our monsters. Let's take a look at our current skeleton so we can see what we're dealing with, what already exists in the game. And I'm going to look at the base skeleton. I know there's a couple other larger ones that are essentially upgun versions. But here's our skeleton. So skeletons clock in at challenge rating 1/4, so they're not really challenging on their own. If first level characters should be able to handle a couple of these pretty easily. They're vulnerable to bludgeoning damage. They don't like getting their bones broken. Their AC is really where you'd expect it to be for a challenge rating 1/4, i.e. not high, a fair amount of hit points, and they got a short sword and short bow. These are essentially just run-of-the-mill guys that you can use to pack up an encounter or challenge very, very low-level characters. And then we have this idea of habitual behaviors, that they essentially can pantomime actions from their past lives. Basically, the bones still remember what they did. The necromantic energy that drives them compels them to kill unless they're under command by their master. One thing we have said is that this is essentially just necromantic magic that's driving them. It's not like the spirit of the person who is animated is trapped here. But there is an echo of them, but it's not, their soul isn't bound to the skeleton. And I thought that would be kind of a fun thing to tie into this, was that our MOP 314159 Skeleton and Gelatinous Cube is a classic rite of passage. See, that's fun, right? I love the undead trapped in the gelatinous cube. So when it sucks a player in, they have something else to play with. I also love the classic, like a flooded chamber with undead creatures like hiding in the water, or an entire flooded dungeon with undead in it. That's fun. Because going underground and underwater at the same time, not fun. If you're following the news, they rescued the kids from that flooded cave. Thank goodness. I know that was incredibly harrowing. I'm sure it was a very harrowing experience. You think the time and effort they had to put into that, moving around underwater, not fun. So a good way to terrify your characters. So what I want to do here with the Blazing Skeleton, the idea I kind of had in my mind was I want to tie these guys in some ways to either powerful necromancers or Orcus. And I kind of thought what would be fun is, like, what if the idea of like creating a Blazing Skeleton was a secret you could learn from Orcus? This is why a necromancer might throw in with him. And the other idea, seeing as our current skeleton is CR 1/4, I wanted these guys to be a little beefier. I was going to initially throw them in as CR1. That might change, though. I also do want to keep the Laminate Chaotic Evil, because I think that's going to match up with our Demon Prince of the Undead. So I'm not going to write the full thing out, but what I want to do is come up with some basic ideas. So we have Fiery Soul. So this is the kind of concept I had, was that if you are a priest of Orcus, there's a ritual you learn if you want to animate a skeleton. Take the skeleton of someone who died in a fire, and you can enact a ritual over it. Normally when you animate the undead, this is a specialized ritual for this specific skeleton, drawing on that skeleton story of there's echoes of their past lives. So take someone, they died in a fire, burned away the flesh, you have the skeleton left, you can then enact a ritual on it to reignite that fire that killed it. So that's basically what we've got. We have a skeleton, someone died in a fire, we're capturing that fire and igniting it again. And that gets the sense that's why it's burning so hot. We're going to pick up some of those special abilities from the 4th edition skeleton. What makes a standard skeleton lawful evil while zombies are neutral evil? That comes down to the idea that skeletons are they follow orders well. So that was this idea of lawful, that they are good at obeying their masters. Zombies being less intelligent, being more likely to just stagger about and commit evil. The Blazing Skeleton being chaotic evil, being the risk here is that, like fire, it's hard to control. So now, reflecting that mechanics might be something we don't do. We'll see. We're also going to say, and again, I'll just do a quick bullet point. I'm not going to write an entire thesis because I want to get to designing the full thing. But I think it's worth noting out, these creatures are created by rituals accessible only to those who bargain with Orcus. Now, you can replace Orcus with any deity from your own home campaign, a fire god, another god of the undead, anyone else will work. The important thing here is I want to just tie this idea that there's some hidden knowledge, Now you might think, well, what's the purpose of that? Like, really, you're throwing in this detail. Why say that? The real idea behind it is to give a little bit more of a strategic layer to these creatures in the story. A dungeon master can always ignore the flavor we have. For your own campaign, you can say these guys are whatever. These guys are the taxi drivers in my campaign city. Why not? Hey, I can do whatever I want. But what we're doing here is saying, hey, this could tie what might seem like a random encounter into a bigger truth in my campaign. These guys are going to be used by evil clerics, warlocks, wizards. There's a force behind them. They don't just spontaneously arise. Now, again, in your own campaign, you might just decide this is the site of a big fire, destroyed this building, the souls are restless. I'll use the Blazing Skeleton as the stat block to reflect the monster. Totally cool. It's more for our storytelling, so we are kind of giving a little more, obviously giving consistency, but also when we think of all the things we can use, this gives us ways to tie these into bigger elements of a story. So we're kind of saying these guys need to be tied to someone who created them, because otherwise they're not going to arise. So think of them as like good troopers for a cult. And again, that's kind of what we're tying them into. And again, that's the important thing is these bullet points. That's just for us. Again, for you, we try not to put things in here that tie them too closely to the story. For instance, mechanically, that might be why when you look at the Skulk, we didn't put in the rules. When you summon these, you can sacrifice charisma to bring them in. I think the write-up had that, but I don't believe the mechanics had that. And I think that was trying to straddle that line between giving you something really useful for your campaign and inspiring you, but then not making you feel like you're restricted. So, for instance, we wouldn't say mechanically these creatures must be tied to someone that had a ritual, and then we put in a stat, say a special ability. Instead, it's really just in the flavor text. Again, use it if it inspires you, ignore if it doesn't. The Archangel Derek, I just realized Mike might be accidentally creating Ghost Rider in D&D. Oh, that's going to be the rare Ghost Rider. Oh, the copyright Marvel Comics. Oh, God, I don't want to get sued. Just kidding.